The laughter rattled through the garage like loose bolts in a tin can. They leaned against the walls, leaned over the hood, leaned on each other. Anything to keep their balance as they mocked her. She didn't rush. Every step she took across the grease-stained floor echoed, steady and unbothered, like she'd walked through worse storms before. She didn't raise her voice, didn't meet their jeers with words. All she had was the sound of her boots on the concrete and the look in her eyes, cold, sharp, and unshaken. The man with the watch, the self-appointed king of the room, smirked and fanned his check in the air. 100,000. Easy money, sweetheart. But I know you're not touching this car. This machine is above you. Hell, it's above half the so-called experts in this city. The others nodded, their phones already recording. She said nothing. She only bent down, placed her toolbox by the wheel, and pulled out a single wrench. It was quiet now, almost too quiet. Even the laughter hesitated, unsure if she was really about to do it. She brushed her hand along the chrome bumper, the way a surgeon might steady themselves before the first cut. The car was a mess, engine dead, timing off, wires like tangled veins. Anyone else might have panicked. But she didn't just see a machine. She saw a challenge, a puzzle, a story written in grease and rust. One man whispered behind her, loud enough to sting. She's just pretending. Watch, she won't even find the starter. She ignored him. Her mind was already moving, her eyes catching every detail. She tightened a bolt, adjusted a line, checked the plugs. Each movement was precise, practiced, like she was dancing with the machine. Minutes turned into an hour. Sweat beaded on her forehead, mixing with the smudges of oil. The men shifted uneasily, their laughter thinning into murmurs. The man with the check forced another chuckle, louder this time, trying to drown out his own doubt. Don't waste your time, lady. That engine's been to 3 of the best shops in the state. If they couldn't fix it, you sure as hell won't. But she kept going. She worked with a patience that unnerved them, with a certainty that made their mockery sound weaker each time. And then, as the night pressed deeper and the air grew heavy with silence, she stopped, wiped her hands, walked to the driver's seat. No one breathed. No one blinked. She turned the key. For a second, nothing. Just a dry cough from the engine, a teasing echo of failure. The men grinned, ready to erupt. The man with the watch raised his phone, already framing his victory shot. But then, the engine roared. A sound so sharp, so alive, it shook the tools hanging on the walls. Fire spat from the exhaust. The machine didn't just start. It thundered, like a beast unleashed after years in chains. Her eyes never left the man with the watch. She revved the engine once, twice, and each time it was like a slap across every smirk in the room. Silence swallowed them. Phones lowered. Smiles fell. The man's hand trembled as he looked at the check in his hand. The 100,000 he had waved so proudly now felt like a chain around his neck. He swallowed hard, sweat beading on his temple. She stepped out of the car, wiped her hands on her apron, and held out her palm. You said 100,000. I believe this belongs to me. No one laughed now. No one dared. The only sound in the room was the steady purr of the engine, the sound of her victory. And in that moment, every one of them knew. They hadn't just underestimated a mechanic. They had underestimated a storm. The roar of the engine didn't just fill the garage. It shook something loose in her chest. She had lived her whole life being told what she couldn't do, what she wasn't meant for, what wasn't her lane. And now, the machine was screaming her answer for her. But to understand the weight of that sound, you'd have to go back. She had grown up in a neighborhood where every day was a choice between shrinking to survive or standing tall and risking the hit. Her father had been a janitor who worked nights. Her mother a nurse who came home with tired feet and tired eyes, but never without a smile. They didn't have much, but they gave her grit. While other kids played with dolls, she found herself drawn to the cracked radios, broken bikes, and discarded gadgets piled on the sidewalks. She'd sit cross-legged with a screwdriver in her hand, prying them open, fascinated by the hidden worlds of gears, wires, and circuits. Her mother would shake her head, but never stop her. Her father would grin, pat her shoulder, and say, "Machines don't care what color you are. They don't care if you're a man or woman. If you respect them, they'll talk to you." By 16, she could strip an engine and rebuild it blindfolded. But the world outside her garage wasn't blind. It saw her skin, her gender, and it sneered. The first shop she applied to laughed in her face. The second gave her a mop instead of a wrench. The third hired her only to stick her in the back, telling customers she was just the assistant. But she stayed. She listened. She watched. She learned. Every slam of a door, every insult muttered under a breath, every doubt tossed her way was fuel. Not for revenge. She wasn't built for petty wars. No, she wanted something bigger. To prove that she wasn't just capable. She was undeniable. And tonight, in that dimly lit garage, with half a dozen men lined up to watch her fail, she had her chance. The man with the watch, his name was Mason Carrington, CEO of a luxury import chain. The kind of man who collected cars the way other men collected cufflinks. His empire was built on chrome and cash, and his arrogance matched both. When his prized car broke down, he saw it as an opportunity to mock, to flaunt, to remind everyone that money was power. But money couldn't fix what pride had blinded him to. He hadn't just underestimated her skills. He had underestimated her resolve. Now, as she stood with her hand outstretched, Mason's smirk had curdled into something darker. He slapped the check into her palm, harder than he needed to, but she didn't flinch. She folded it neatly, tucked it into her pocket, and walked toward the door. Behind her, the men who had laughed at her only hours before stood silent, their faces pale under the harsh garage lights. She didn't need their applause. The roar of the engine was enough. But this was just the beginning. Word spread fast. Too fast. By morning, videos of the moment had gone viral. Clips of the engine roaring to life were plastered across feeds, stitched with hashtags calling her the Queen of Engines, the mechanic who shut them up. Some people cheered, others mocked louder than ever, insisting it was luck or staged. Mason tried to control the story, releasing statements that she had tampered with the car beforehand, that it was all a trick. But the footage was undeniable, and his bitterness only made him look smaller. Meanwhile, she found herself flooded with messages. People wanting her to fix their cars, young girls asking how she'd learned, mechanics from across the country writing just to say thank you. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving in the shadows of the shop floor. She was a name, a symbol. But Mason couldn't let it go. His empire had always been polished, but behind the glass and steel was rot. Lawsuits he'd buried, workers he'd underpaid, cars he'd sold with problems hidden under coats of paint. And now, with the spotlight turned on him because of that viral humiliation, the cracks began to show. Reporters dug deeper. Customers came forward. His competitors circled like sharks. All because he couldn't resist mocking a black woman mechanic. All because he thought his money made him untouchable. And she didn't chase fame. She didn't build a brand. She just kept doing what she loved. Wrench in hand, sleeves rolled up, grease under her nails. But every time she turned the key and an engine roared back to life, it wasn't just a car running again. It was a story, a reminder, an echo of that night when the laughter died and respect was born. What Mason thought would be a quick humiliation became the very spark that burned his empire down. And for her, that night wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of everything. The night the engine roared, she didn't sleep. Not because she was anxious, but because for the first time in years, she felt light. She stayed awake at her kitchen table, her grease-stained hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, staring at the folded check Mason had slammed into her palm. $100,000. It was absurd, more money than she'd seen in her entire life. But what unsettled her wasn't the money itself. It was what it meant. For years, she'd been invisible. She was the one cleaning up spilled oil, tightening bolts in the back, while men strutted around at the front of the shop. Customers barely glanced at her, assuming she was a clerk, or worse, the cleaning girl. Now suddenly, the world had seen her. They'd seen what she could do. But attention was dangerous. She knew how fast it could turn from praise to scorn. By sunrise, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Strangers flooding her messages. Some cheered her on. Others sent cruel comments, hiding behind screens. She ignored most of it, until one message stopped her cold. It was from a girl named Amara, just 13. My teacher said girls like me can't do mechanics. But I saw your video. Can you teach me? That was the moment she realized this wasn't about engines anymore. While she wrestled with this new reality, Mason Carrington's world was crumbling. The video had humiliated him. The image of his face, red, twisted with rage as a black woman proved him wrong, circulated everywhere. Board members whispered about his temper. Investors called for explanations. He doubled down, desperate to protect his image. But his arrogance, the very thing that had carried him to the top, was now gasoline on the fire. Old skeletons crawled out of closets. Former employees leaked documents. Customers banded together, filing lawsuits over faulty cars. What should have been a contained embarrassment spiraled into a full-scale collapse. But Mason wasn't done with her. Not yet. 2 weeks later, she opened her small garage for the first time. She'd used part of Mason's check to rent an abandoned service station at the edge of town. It was run down, its walls scarred with graffiti, the roof patched with tin sheets. But to her, it was freedom. She painted the name herself on the cracked window. True Grit Auto. Her first customers weren't strangers, they were neighbors. People who'd known her since she was the little girl tinkering with broken bikes on the sidewalk. They came not just because she was good, but because they believed in her. One by one, cars rolled in. Word spread. Within months, her lot was always full. And then Amara showed up. The girl stood at the edge of the garage, clutching a notebook, eyes wide. "Can I just watch?" she asked softly. She didn't hesitate. "You're not just gonna watch," she said, tossing Amara a pair of gloves. "You're gonna learn." That was the beginning of something bigger. By the end of the year, she had 5 apprentices, girls and boys, most of them written off by schools or overlooked by the world. Her garage became more than a place to fix cars. It became a place to fix people. Meanwhile, Mason's spiral grew darker. He lost contracts. The board forced him to step down. The empire his father had built, an empire Mason had expanded with ruthless pride, slipped from his hands piece by piece. He sold off his cars to cover debts. The house, the jets, the estates gone. And everywhere he turned, there was that video. That damn video. He told himself he hated her. But late at night, staring at the ceiling of a rented condo, he wondered if what he really hated was himself. 2 years later, fate dragged them back into the same room. It was at a charity gala. She hadn't wanted to go, fancy dresses and champagne weren't her scene. But one of her apprentices, now in college, begged her to attend. They were honoring women in trades, and her name was on the list. She arrived in a simple black dress, her hands still rough with calluses. The crowd buzzed as she stepped onto the stage, accepting the award with a quiet smile. Cameras flashed, applause thundered. And then, through the glare, she saw him. Mason Carrington. He was thinner now, his hair streaked with grey, the swagger gone from his shoulders. He stood at the back, half hidden, watching her. Their eyes met for the first time in years, and the room seemed to freeze. She thought he might storm out. Instead, he walked forward. Slowly, cautiously. When he finally reached her, he didn't sneer. He didn't boast. He just said, voice low enough for only her to hear, "You were right. I was wrong. And it cost me everything." She studied him for a long moment. Then, instead of answering, she turned back to the microphone. "Engines don't care what you look like. They don't care where you come from. All they care is if you respect them, if you learn them, if you listen. People could stand to be more like engines." The room erupted in applause. Mason stepped back, swallowed by the crowd. She never saw him again. But his legacy was the lesson. His empire's collapse became her wind at the back. Over the years, True Grit Auto expanded into multiple locations, each staffed by apprentices who had once thought their dreams were impossible. Her story became a blueprint, a spark for others. And every time she picked up a wrench, she remembered that night. The roar of the engine, the silence that followed, and the truth it carried. What was meant to break her became the moment that remade her. And Mason? His empire wasn't stolen. It collapsed under the weight of his pride. She just happened to be the one who lit the match.